Welcome to Beyond the Frame, a show by the SOCA Global Outreach Office, sharing the new, the now, and the necessary in a digest of thought-provoking news and tidbits from the global art world, with a particular focus on marginalized voices. We bring you news and stories centered around equity, inclusivity, and sustainability, exploring the places where art is urgent, political, and current, while reflecting on the complexities of today's world. I am your host, Jillian Rhodes, the Global Outreach Coordinator of SOCA. So let's start with the news. We begin in a festive mood. In a previous episode, I discussed Trippin' 50, a list of festivals curated for their cultural importance, sustainability, and other such factors. This episode, I want to talk about the Terra Forma Festival in Milan, a 3-day experimental music festival. Unlike most festivals, which just appear in a place and then vanish, this one aims to develop, evolve, and restore the natural environment where it takes place. One goal, for example, has been re-establishing local fauna in its host village. The entire planning and design process is carried out by a cohort of designers, architects, philosophers, and musicians, different each year in order to, quote, ideate and innovate, unquote, the festival. Terra forma is a word that comes from the concept of rendering an inhabitable place habitable through restoration and reforestation, and it's clear that that's what this festival is about. Last episode, I talked about AI and its impacts on the art world, and in one of the stories talked about ChatGPT hallucinating sources of AI and medieval art. Interestingly, an article in Art in America touches on this exact subject with a detailed review of a new book called Computational Formalism, Art History and Machine Learning by Amanda Wasilewski, on the potential connections between AI and art history. Many of you might have seen the forgeries of famous historical artists by machine learning, and we all know the struggle of getting computers to recognize images. We deal with it for every I am not a robot test. The article is too deep and nuanced to cover in detail here, but it provides a very thoughtful and comprehensive review of the main issue of how computers learn and how it comes into direct conflict with the metaphorical nature of art and meaning making. The article is linked in the description, and I highly recommend it. We move on to something very different: salaries and sustainability in the art world. An article in the art newspaper breaks down the art market salary report and points out where it agrees with reality and where it falls short. While the report optimistically points to higher salaries, the article points out that it doesn't account for inflation or cost of living and leaves out large groups of workers who contribute to the art market, such as writers, researchers, and freelancers. It also discusses the gender pay gap and nods to certain large auction houses and institutions that are updating their maternal and family leave policies. Finally, the article touches on the emissions and sustainability factor, which I've discussed in previous episodes. Decreases in shipping emissions were counteracted by booming IT costs. However, the popular blockchain Ethereum's move to a more environmentally friendly proof-of-stake model is projected to bring down the environmental cost of NFTs, a common argument against the sector. In short, progress is being made, but it is slow and does not always translate to the underprivileged. What else is new? In this show, we've offered multiple examples of how art is often at the heart of politics and conflict. And here is yet another example. Tensions between China and Taiwan are heating up, and art is right there in the middle of it. In this case, the question of restitution around a huge collection of Chinese artifacts and art that were moved from Beijing's Forbidden City to the Taipei National Palace Museum in 1949 due to conflicts on the mainland. Now, China wants the collection back, and the museum flatly refuses. They won't even loan the collection to third countries for fear that it will be seized. The art newspaper reports on the situation fully, but it's just another confirmation of how deeply connected art, identity, and history are. We round out the news section with something lighter. Art in America reports on how artists are helping the private space exploration industry flourish by sending art into space on rockets. A project between Jeff Koons and SpaceX's Elon Musk offers paired art pieces, one for the moon and one for Earth, that will eventually be sent to actually land on the moon. The article details a variety of other projects and conceptual art pieces, as well as the limitations and exorbitant costs involved with anything about rockets, and asks the question, is something more meaningful because it's in space? It's an interesting question and a worthwhile article to read. It's linked below. That's enough for the news, so let's move on to the trends section. An article in Frieze talks about the top exhibitions this summer in the United States, and what struck me about the exhibitions presented is their diversity, but as well as how they match many trends I've been discussing in the show for the past several months. The rise of ceramic art, a focus on alternative narratives, abstraction, and multimedia work. Indeed, these exact things are all mentioned in the article. On a slightly different track, I noticed an article in Etsy on 7 Middle Eastern women artists who are pushing the boundaries of what is expected of them and what they are expected to make. I've often talked about how non-Western artists are handcuffed by their cultures, expected to only work in a limited and assumed context, often enforced by the outsider perspective. The works highlighted in the article show this tension as these women artists question, push back, and respond to the boxes they are placed in. The article is well worth a read. We move on to the featured artist section now, which today focuses on Italian artist, architect, and designer Gaetano Pesce. I found him by chance while browsing art news websites and was interested by the bright colors and interesting shapes of his work. Researching him, I discovered that he is actually one of the most prominent figures in Italian modernism in the past several decades. The list of his accomplishments goes on, and his work is displayed in most major museums around the world. As an architect and industrial designer, I have even seen his work in Paris at Les Halles and the Parc de la Villette, but of course, I didn't know it was his. Pesce started by studying architecture at the University of Venice, and then joined a collective interested in programmed art, like the Bauhaus group. Around that time, he wrote a manifesto defending the right of inconsistency to art, that an artist must change and must be free to not repeat themselves. Indeed, it is clear that he has stuck to this manifesto over the years, constantly branching out and trying new things, though he does maintain a certain style or look, as I've noticed, which, as one article points out, is particularly interested in non-right angles. One of the most interesting things I found about Pesce is precisely his view on modernism, which is that modernism is not actually a style, but rather a method for interpreting the present and exploring possibilities for the future, all while celebrating and preserving individuality. This is different from other modernist interpretations and does not remain time-bound by a zeitgeist or ethos, but allows for a constant reworking and re-evaluation of the work. Art is not a product to be sold then, it is a creative response to the outside world. As an artist myself, I deeply appreciate his philosophy. Because his work is so varied, it's hard to discuss it specifically. He has often designed furniture and indeed gained particular fame for his Up series chairs in the late 1960s, which was meant to comment on the condition of women in the world and was actually the first industrial design to make a political statement. Generally, however, I can say that his work is whimsical and flowing, often colorful and fun. I do recommend you check out his work further if you haven't yet. We're just about out of time, so let's quickly look through some tidbits. An article in Ocula magazine offers a perspective on whether or not an unflattering portrayal in a piece of art can be considered defamation. This is particularly relevant in caricatures and political cartoons. In short, the article says that there is little precedent, and what cases have been brought to court, it is not usually resolved on the side of the claimant. It is an interesting idea, though, and certainly artistic renderings have been the subject of great controversy, even to the point of violence. The wildfire smoke in the US has caused trouble for summer art fairs and events, and many museums have even closed down, in part or in full, in response to poor air quality. The pollution has also caused trouble for MoMA, as ecological activists have been protesting against board chair Marie-Josée Kravis, whose husband has ties to large fossil fuel and oil companies. The activists call attention to the fact that many so-called philanthropists with problematic business ties use art and donations to art institutes as a way of cleaning up their image. And finally, an article in Artsy finally asks that question: what makes an abstract painting good? Abstract and minimal art is at the heart of that old joke, my 2-year-old could make that. But could they? The article offers a few examples, but in the end, it seems to come down to the same old answer. Good art is in the eye of the beholder. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching Beyond the Frame, a production of the SOCA Global Outreach Office.